This discussion will be moderated by CANTO Director Mark Reynolds. Mark is the Vice President of Legal and Regulatory Affairs of Guyana Telephone and Telegraph Company, Guyana's largest telecommunications service provider. In this capacity, he leads the company's regulatory strategy before the government of Guyana and its respective sector agencies, and guides the execution of public-private partnerships. As a digital development practitioner, Mark has led policy dialogue and produced best practices papers regionally and internationally in areas of legacy telecommunications services and emerging technologies in the ICT sector, particularly in the areas of cybersecurity, regulatory frameworks, data protection, and artificial intelligence. This panel will also feature Giovanni King, Bureau of Telecoms and Post, Curaçao, and Kenva Williams, Director General, TCI Telecommunications Commission. Our topic: public policies and regulations to promote economic growth. Mark, I leave the discussion in your capable hands.
Thank you, Tisha. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the CANTO AGM, and it's a pleasure to see all of you here following on the very spirited discussions that have taken place so far at CANTO. Now, let us dive into the meat of the matter before you actually get to your actual meals for the day. And we're looking at public policies and regulations to stimulate economic growth. And coming out of the pandemic, or leading ourselves out of the pandemic, we have found that the telecommunications sector, there has been a resurgence of it being a cornerstone of development, of development and closing the gap, whether it be in gender, whether it be in population, whether it be in the relationship between the public and private sector. We find that the telecommunications sector has been called upon to be a crucial factor in this. Following on the AGM keynote speech of Stephen Price, we find that this cannot be underscored anymore across Latin America and small island developing states. And it's serendipitous to have these two leaders, Kenva and Giovanni, both from Curaçao and from Turks and Caicos, being able to speak with us this morning, about the importance of public regulations and policies. Now, just from a context, policy is defined by organizations, and regulations are brought into effect to support those policies and ensure that they are enforced. And there can be a disconnect in how this plays out. And before I even get into our discussions and our questions today, I'd like to share a brief bit about both of these gentlemen with you. Giovanni started his professional career in 1992. He has 8 years of experience teaching telecommunications and ICT at a secondary vocational school in Curaçao for 8 years and 21 years of experience in telecommunications industry. During the past 21 years, he has had different top-level positions with the Telecommunications and Postal Regulatory Authority for the former Netherlands Antilles. And also he has served as a business development and operations director for a long-distance telecom service provider in Curaçao. He has been employed from 2016 as a Regulatory Authority CEO, Regulatory Authority of Curaçao as their COO. On the flip side, we have Kenva, who has over 20 years of experience in engineering and technology, and he joined Turks and Caicos Island Telecommunications Commission team in 2006 as a spectrum engineer, and then he progressed. Now where he's in 2019, he has been acting in the capacity as the Director General of the entity. He was trained to the regional and international telecommunications regulatory community. He has presented on behalf of the Commission at local and international forums by moderating and participating in many panel discussions at conferences and various fora. And attending these fora, he has provided he has been able to garner a network of opportunities and amongst his peers to be able to benefit Turks and Caicos. So what we have here are the experience of two men who who come from entities that have sustainable economies based on tourism that have been impacted by COVID, but they are underpinning their various industries to support and develop the changes that are needed for the issues that COVID has presented to us. And I pause there because there's just so much that we have had to face as an industry. So to that point, I'd like to start with Giovanni. Giovanni, from your capacity in Curacao, what has your industry done to respond to COVID-19 to sustain economic growth?
First and foremost, once again, thank you for the opportunity to participating in a CANTO AGM conference and the opportunity to speak on what's happening on Curacao. So one of the major things that we have looked at is especially when we look at the impact of COVID, is look at how has COVID impacted the use of the infrastructure, and basically how did that impact the economy on its own. During our first lockdown, that's where we really realized the importance of having a robust ICT telecoms infrastructure. Curacao is very well connected when it comes to the subsea cabling, so we thought that we wouldn't have had an issue. On the island itself, our infrastructures are covering the island very well. We have over 100% penetration on mobile. We have over 80% penetration on broadband connectivity, but still that wasn't enough. So the initial thing that we did is like look at what we needed to do. And the first thing was go back and advise the government that we think that we need to look at more competition on the island. So we had started the process to license a third mobile operator and are looking into licensing a third party to provide fiber to the home connectivity to across the island. That process is ongoing. Additional to that, we also look, even though this process was already in motion, what we realized that we needed to review our legal framework to support all of these things that we are currently wanting to do. And as a result, we looked at our current legal framework and made some changes as it results to number portability, USF, and other aspects that we think are important to further enable economic growth. One of the parts that we also looked at and we are currently working at is digitalization of our education system. During COVID, the first lockdown, we realized that we were not able to get everybody connected and working from home or studying from home. So steps have been made to get all schools connected to fiber. That process has finalized, and we're now evaluating those underserved areas, how we can make sure that if in any case we need to go back to a situation where everybody is home, that we can also, that the operators are able to provide the necessary connectivity so that everybody can do this. In Curacao right now, we are still working in a hybrid situation where people are working from home and in the fixed offices as well, indicating that the impact on the use of our infrastructure is still at a higher level than we were accustomed to before the pandemic. So to round it up, I think the investment or supporting the operators to make the investment in infrastructure, and from a government perspective, allowing third parties to come in to create a more robust competitive environment. Those are the initial steps that we made to support economic growth.
Thank you for that, Giovanni. Over to you, Kenva, because I find Turks and Caicos to be a particularly interesting scenario. Turks and Caicos has a population size of roughly 39,000, but they have tourism, they have arrivals that total a maximum of 1.5 million as in 2019, but was severely impacted in 2020. It showed that there were numbers that had decreased from your tourism arrivals had decreased by about 70-75%. Following on Giovanni's position in terms of partnership with the government and the sector, what is happening in Turks and Caicos to help to bolster the economy?
Well, thanks. Let me speak in regards to what transpired during the pandemic. As you know, we indicated that Turks and Caicos certainly is a market, a very small market in regards to its population, but we have a big market in regards to its tourism base. And when I say tourism base, you'll find a lot of owners and developers are using their homes for VRB rentals. And so our economy in regards to tourism, it was affected for persons going into the hotel, but not necessarily affected for the persons who are renting villas, which is a huge market that is currently going on in Turks and Caicos. So during the pandemic, we did a survey to see and to check the quality of the telecommunication network when it comes to ISP services. The survey basically showed that there was a need of broadband. As you know, Turks and Caicos is consisted of 7 inhabited islands, Providenciales being the island that has full infrastructure, all of the infrastructure to facilitate the broadband needs. But when you look at the family islands, they were certainly affected because the telecommunication network using legacy system certainly is it doesn't have fiber to the homes, and so that generated the talk of having or partnering with the service providers with a national fiber optic ring. And so the government has embarked on that initiative, partnering with the service providers to invest into infrastructure to provide a national fiber optic ring. So in the event of a disaster, in the event of a pandemic, that every customer, every consumer, every person in Turks and Caicos have quality telecommunication services of which is currently in Providenciales, which have the infrastructure and the fiber, international fiber to that island. And so that is what's going on now. As it stands now, we are open up, and so we are not. There are some areas that is impacted by COVID, depending on the amount or the amount of persons that has COVID. You'll find that the government will then occasionally say, okay, we've reached that threshold, so we need to shut down. But the country is open for business. Schools are open. Everyone is back in their working environment. So we don't really see the impact of COVID at this present moment. But government also during the pandemic looked at, they realized that they needed to improve on their e-governance systems, doing business and transactions online. So they had started that process and they realized that it is a need. And so government also has embarked on looking at how they can strengthen their internal e-governance system, continue doing online services. And so they are taking the lead on that. Of course, in some entities, in some government and private entities, they have already moved towards doing e-transaction. But as you know, a country can't move forward if they can't do business with government seamlessly. And so government realized that they need to do that, and they're currently looking at improving their own internal network to do e-governing transactions.
Thank you for that, Kenvo. And just to follow on from that.
And I think we lost Mark.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, while we're waiting for Mark to come back, I can talk a little bit more about what we have been doing, because we're open up again as a country and trying to bring in our tourism back to the levels it was before the pandemic, and also to increase on what we already have. So there are various projects going on in the hospitality industry. And there is where we see the need for more and better infrastructure as well. As we are trying to cater to higher end tourists, you know that you need to basically make sure that their needs are covered. And today we see that nobody can deal or travel without knowing for a fact that they're going to have the right level of connectivity. So that's one of the reasons why government is also looking at new subsea cable projects and also looking at the investments that we need to do here to guarantee that we can provide those type of services. As we are also looking at the diversification of the industry, we're looking at the digital nomads. What are their needs? How do we get them here? And of course, if you want to cater to that sector, then you're gonna have to make sure that you have the levels of capacity needed to guarantee that these people can come down to the island, enjoy the sun and the sea, and keep on working at the same level they would do at home.
Yeah, that is true. I certainly agree with that. Certainly you find that tourists, wherever they go, the same services that they get at home, whether it's Netflix, or whether it's using whatever technology they use to communicate, whenever they travel, they want that same level of service and be able to use the same application they use at home. And so that's why as a regulator, we tend to encourage innovation. You can be abroad, but it's as if you are home using the same services and devices that you use. So that's important. Mark, welcome back.
Welcome back.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. Sorry today. My apologies. We seem to have had some technical difficulties from my side. I guess that's the nature of the world that we live in.
Right.
Today, again, to the challenges though, and ironically to speaking about challenges, what are the solutions that you as regulators want to see visualized? I mean, Stephen Price has spoken this morning about concession on devices. He had spoken about connectivity. He had spoken about other means of engagement with customers. But what from you as regulators, what is it that you want to see in terms of solutions that can address some of the problems that we face in terms of regulation and therefore to create a realistic path towards economic growth?
I mean, I can start on that. I think from a regulator standpoint, independence. Yes, we are a statutory body, and so the notion is that we have the independence to make decisions, but that is not the case. And so I think government need to be a little bit more cognizant in giving true independence to regulators to be able to make a decision on their own without going through the same. You have regulation to give you independence, but at the end of the day, any major decisions still have to go to CAP, and the government have to make that decision. And so that is one of our challenges as we speak, modifying the regulation to keep with current technology and industry in a timely manner. Also in collection of fees. I know some service providers may not wish to have that discussion, but it's a reality. Being able to collect the fees and collect it in a timely manner, not having to have a debate or a discussion with the service providers and fees and government, because at the end of the day, the fees do go to the government. And so that is some of the challenges is we have. Mostly lack of independence, being able to address market trend to correct anti-competitiveness in a timely manner.
I would add to that one of the things that we have seen is that, especially empowered or magnified by the pandemic, what we've seen is the uptake of use of technology and ICTs in general, and that our rules and regulations can't be changed at the same pace. So we need to be able to create legislation that's more flexible, or we need to have government be able to make adjustments to enable us to move forward and not hamper the development as they come forward. Because at times you will find that there is a development, but your legislation just doesn't give you the room or space to engage. And if you do so in an inappropriate manner, you could end up in court, and that would only make matters worse. So to create that flexibility, that is a thing that I think that we need to be looking at. And one of the things that we are looking at right now is the creation of what they're calling the regulatory sandboxes. So to try to introduce into legislation that area where we can be flexible to understand what the changes are that we are facing, and to from there create policies or legislation, but then to have that go through the process of being enacted to enable us to follow the trends that we are facing today. Mark, you're muted.
My apologies. Speaking of trends, Giovanni, there are three things that have come to my mind in terms of challenges that are topical to the industry. Now, from last year, I had attended a conference within the region, and one of the major concerns was a single ICT space, and being as a solution to holistic wealth for the Caribbean, for the region. Version of those discussions was that our laws are not up to speed yet. We don't have the systems in place. It was more of we're realizing the same problems rather than fighting. We're realizing the same problems. We're speaking about them over and over again, but there's no realistic traction collectively within the region to have it solved. Yes, there are workshops in place. There are regular run-of-the-mill things that are being done to state on paper that this is being done. But what is it that you think can be realistically achieved, that is palpable? Let us start the discussion now so it leads into our annual conference later this year. What is it that you'd want to see done?
But one of the things that basically has already been is basically holistically growing to a certain direction is the fact that the two major operators are across the region. So from an operational perspective, we have been forced into a single ICT space already. What we need to do is look at what are the low-hanging fruits when it comes to some level of harmonization of legislation. Now, I don't think we need to go into the nitty-gritty, but there are certain things that I think that would be beneficial for the industry, the regulators, and the operators if all of these things were available and practically the same across the region. If we're talking about USF, USF. If we're talking about number portability, if we're talking about roaming across the region, like your home, as the operators are the same across the region. If we are talking about interconnectivity between the islands and lowering, for instance, the fees that are paid for transit when it comes to IP traffic. So there are things that we can do that would make it our regions seem as one, and that would facilitate economic development across the region from my humble perspective.
I agree too. Single ICT space, I think, one, we first have to start with harmonization of our legislation, not to the extent, but various for simple things as number portability. Each country doing their own number portability exercise and paying to do that exercise, I think it's not necessarily at this point. If you look, it's almost the same, right down to national roaming. I think it's past time. We should have already had enacted a policy or some harmonized regulations where we have free national roaming, so I can roam to any of the neighboring Caribbean countries and pay the same rate. I can go to the US and as far as the UK, and the roaming rate is less than that is if I was to travel to Jamaica or down to St. Martin or in St. Kitts and those places. So I think we have to start from home to introduce those things, number portability, roaming rates. Let's look at type approval certificates. As you know, the regulators has the authority to validate devices that comes into the island and set a fee. And so our fee certainly is different from every other fees. And so we constantly get comments that, this country charged $50. Why are you guys charging $200 US and so forth like that? And so I think we need to harmonize on those standpoints and see how we can benefit from those type of revenue. When you look at the industry of boating and yachting industry, where in some region, they're able to come in port 10 miles in and still use the satellite services. In some countries, they're not able to. In some countries, they allowed it. And so I think we need to harmonize that, make a decision to say, well, okay, if we are going to allow these satellite services to who have their footprint over our jurisdiction, what is the rate they should pay? And it should be a simple rate. Whereas US dollars, it doesn't matter if you're a US country or you're making EC. And so these companies, international companies, certainly are US driven. And so I think the rate, if it's $200 US dollars, it should be applied to all of the Caribbean countries. It doesn't matter of your country currency. So I think that's where we need to start.
I definitely agree with what Canva is saying here. And we have been trying, and there have been discussions across the region for years on the topic. And maybe when we delve into the more major aspects of creating that harmonized regulatory environment, we always end up in how each jurisdiction can maintain its own independence. So looking at what the low-hanging fruits are and reaching agreements that those would help us to move forward one step or small steps at a time. So I think that's definitely important to do so. And as I indicated in the beginning, we are right now living in a time where technology is moving on a fast pace. So we need to have those regulatory frameworks that would allow the regulators to be more flexible in order to be able to readjust or shift it to a different gear to keep up with the upcoming challenges. If we are stuck in our bureaucratic frameworks and state of minds, you will see that we will not be able to help improve economic development through this technological IT infrastructure.
Thank you for that, Giovanni and Kenva. And firstly to close, there are some key takeaways that I'd like for us as a panel and for our attendees to consider. The cooperation within the ICT, from what I've gotten from the discussion, a cooperation with within the ICT sector is key to creating sustainable economic growth. The public sector entities must lead the way in enabling digital evolution by changing the modes of engagement and communication, which means that the government must be able to lead the digital charge. It cannot come from the operators alone. It must be the person that create that framework for success. The sector, and this is a personal reflection based on what you have stated, the sector must have foresight to regulate and participate actively in developing industries, which would imply that we have to have a change in the business models of traditional telecommunications, fintech, mobile wallets, telemedicine, digital literacy. How can telecommunications industries serve those entities, those industries, to promote growth? And for there to be robust and collective economic development, there must be earnest efforts made by regional leaders and regulators to put this at the forefront of their agendas. Gentlemen, thank you for the discussion today. If there are any questions, I do see a question or a suggestion from Miss Kim Matho. Kenva, Kim had a question for you. Can you tell us a bit about the contributions of PPP partners to the fiber ring?
Well, that's his initiative that hasn't started yet. And so I just indicated that it's government objective to do it, and we'll be looking at PPP. What the PPP structure will look like, that has to go to consultation. We don't know.
Excellent. So, gentlemen, as we close, do you have any final comments that you'd like to leave with the attendees? And just for regulators, what would you like to see for the industry going forward, coming out of the pandemic and managing it in this new paradigm that we're facing?
Well, for me, if I may go first, Canva, one of the most important things that I have seen and we are still seeing today is the impact of cyber breaches. As more and more we're using this technology. So that would be one of the areas where I would say that looking at harmonization again, let's come together as regulators. Let's talk about this topic. Let's see how we can help each other because as we're using this more, the breaches as it relates to cybersecurity are becoming more and greater, and it can have a negative impact on our economies and on our islands in a whole.
For me, first, thanks for being a part of this panelist. For me, in my perspective, I think we need to have more discussion on how we're going to deal with international corporations who are venturing into our territories in our footprint using satellite services. I think the regulators, the government, and the service providers, we need to be serious in talking about harmonization of laws and how we protect the infrastructure and services that the service providers or government has invested millions of dollars in how to protect it, but at the same time, don't stifle innovation, don't stifle technology, future technology, where consumers can benefit and use a service that is international, use it locally, regionally, at a good rate.
Thank you very much, Kenva and Giovanni, for this very interesting, insightful discussion in regards to developing the industries that were the telecommunications industry and ICT sectors. It's so appropriate that we have had a discussion going forward, speaking about all the things that need to be done, and then everything tapers towards cybersecurity to be able to protect the investment. As we move to digital platforms in terms of doing our everyday business, we must have a way to secure and protect the investments of our people. So if there are no further questions, Tisha, I hand it over back to you, and gentlemen, we will see you in Miami.